I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos. Brum.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a series review. As you already know from my previous videos about Star Trek Picard, I was not a fan of the first 2 seasons of this show, and that's putting it mildly. Also, in the bigger picture, the current era of Star Trek as we've seen in any show that's come out since 2016 hasn't really spoken to me either, and that's putting it very mildly as well. And while I can't say that my overall sentiment about the current state of the Star Trek franchise has changed, I also have to be fair and admit when I think something is actually good. As far as Star Trek Picard goes, Season 3, helmed by showrunner Terry Matalas, has been one of the biggest course corrections I've ever seen for any show and in any genre. Not that it really even feels like a third season of Star Trek Picard. To be quite honest, this soft, hard reboot version of the show feels more like an 8th and final season of The Next Generation, and that's really the way I look at it. While I was skeptical going into it, from the first episode of this season, it's been clear that Season 3 is meant to be a respectful send-off to the Next Generation cast. And while I've already enjoyed what I've seen right out the gate, every episode of this season has been even better than the previous, which brings us to Episode 4 of Star Trek Picard Season 3, titled No-Win Scenario. Episode 4 starts with a flashback from 5 years earlier of Picard sitting at a bar where he's approached by some young Academy cadets. They ask him some questions about his career and how he had overcome tough situations. Picard optimistically tells them that no matter how bleak and unwinnable a situation seems, if crew members are dedicated to each other, then they are never without hope. Flash forward to present day. Everything on the Titan is extremely grim. The ship has no power, it's sinking into a nebula, and the odds of the crew surviving are pretty much zero. After their confrontation at the bridge at the end of Episode 3, Picard tries to apologize to Will for what had transpired, but Riker admits that Picard was actually right, and that his son's death did change him. At the same time, he advises Picard to use the few hours they still have left to get to know his son, and Picard does just that. Picard and his recently discovered son Jack drink some whiskey together at a holodeck bar, which is operated by its own isolated and separate power source. Captain Shaw, who's still recovering from his wounds, advises 7 of 9 on how to locate and capture the changeling saboteur on the ship. He then joins Picard and Jack at the bar and finally reveals why he hates Picard. Apparently, when he was a young engineer, many of his friends died during the Battle of Wolf 359, the Borg attack where Picard was assimilated by the Borg. For those unfamiliar, these events took place during Star Trek The Next Generation, during some very memorable episodes. While Picard at the time had no control over what had happened, it is not unlikely that somebody like Captain Shaw would hold a grudge against him because of the massive casualties from that Borg attack. We saw similar sentiments from Captain Benjamin Sisko on Deep Space Nine, who had lost his wife during that same attack. Meanwhile, Riker wants to record a farewell message to Deanna Troi, but ultimately, he can't bring himself to do it. Just when things are looking very bleak, Beverly discovers that bursts of energy coming from the nebula are occurring within a timed pattern. She shares this information with Picard and Jack, who speculate that if that energy could be harnessed into the Titan, it could possibly give them enough power to save them. The three share this info with Riker, who is hesitant, but ultimately warms up to the idea of a last-minute emergency plan. At this point in the episode, all the characters we know start cooperating and working together to execute this plan. Without spoiling every detail, by the end of the episode, after overcoming a series of difficult challenges that include facing the Shrike again, flying through an asteroid field, dealing with a changeling, and low levels of life support on ship, the Titan crew managed to pull off the impossible. Let's start with what I liked about this episode. Number 1, it's Star Trek. Back in the gold era of Star Trek shows like the original series, The Next Generation, and Deep Space Nine, Star Trek had a certain uplifting spirit. There were always dangerous threats and difficult situations, but the camaraderie, collaboration, and optimism of a crew would usually help it overcome any challenge. Finally, we got that Star Trek feeling in this episode, and as a viewer, this is exactly what I wanted to see. And it's this type of spirit that, in my opinion, has been largely missing from the Star Trek franchise for many years. I would even go as far as saying that Episode 4 of Star Trek Picard Season 3 is arguably one of the best new Star Trek episodes that's been produced in decades. Number 2, setup and payoff. The The first half of this episode features more intimate conversations between the different characters, including characters connecting and self-reflecting. While in most Hollywood shows today, these type of interactions usually come off as soapy drama filler scenes, in this episode, they're actually in service of the story itself. In every more emotional scene, there are details carefully planted that later pay off when the crew is overcoming the threat, such as Captain Shaw talking about how he used to be an engineer, or Picard telling Jack how he once had to fly blindly with very little power. And when the episode ends with a satisfying conclusion, it is earned. You can really tell that there's thoughtful writing here, fitting for a story of this nature. Number 3, the cast. Once you have good writing, it always helps to have a good cast to sell it to the viewers, especially on a sci-fi show like Star Trek. And the cast here is doing tremendous work. Patrick Stewart, despite his age, is giving everything he's got here, giving us classic Picard moments where he actually has a commanding presence, and it's great to see. Jonathan Frakes is the same Riker we know from The Next Generation on the one hand, but he's older, and his life experience has affected his own outlook. This new threat is reviving something in Riker, though, that he's lost with the loss of his son, and this nuanced performance by Jonathan Frakes is probably his best as Riker to date. Gates McFadden as Beverly brings her on-screen charm and warm presence at just the right moments, perfectly portraying an older and more experienced version of her character. Marina Sirtis as Deanna Troi doesn't have a lot to do this time, but when we do see her, she seems like the character we know. Jerry Ryan as Seven, Todd Stashwick as Captain Shaw, and Ed Spielers as Jack all give great performances too, and they feel right at home here within this excellent ensemble cast. Number 4, Terry Matalas. I keep mentioning showrunner Terry Matalas every week in my videos, and while he's impressed me in the previous 3 episodes, episode 4 was on a different level. This man knows what he's doing, and I can only hope that we see more Star Trek from him after this season of Picard. As much as I don't feel connected with what's happening with the Star Trek franchise these days, outside of this show, if Matalas has other Star Trek projects down the road as a showrunner, I would definitely give them a chance. He's not just flying by the seat of his pants here or phoning it in. He's given some real thought to the planning and execution of the storytelling of this season, and it shows. He also clearly understands Star Trek and understands what longtime fans of this franchise are looking for. On a more personal note, I've also seen how Terry Matalas has been interacting with fans, something we don't see enough of these days. This week, Matalas even hopped on a live stream with some of the biggest detractors of the Star Trek franchise in recent years, and they all had a very respectful conversation together. Nobody else in Hollywood is doing this type of outreach right now, and the fact that he is only shows how much he cares about his work. Well, that was the good. Now let's talk about the bad. Honestly, I don't really have truly bad things to say. If I was pressed to say anything, it would be that the lighting is still too dark. Maybe there were a few parts of dialogue that I would have worded differently, including an instance of swearing which felt a bit out of place, but it's not really a big deal. I could also bring up again that this season of Picard is basically just a strange anomaly, and that I don't have any interest in any other current Star Trek projects. But you know what? This time, I don't think I should focus on that too much. When something is truly good, like this episode of Picard, why focus on anything bad? Like the crew of the Titan, I'll try to be a bit more positive, at least just for today. And if we're already in a positive mood, I also want to thank the people who have been supporting this channel using the Super Thanks feature. I spend a lot of time putting these videos together, and it means a lot to me that people are enjoying them. Obviously, the more support that I get, the more resources I will have to present you with more content that you will hopefully enjoy. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to my channel, clicking on the bell, liking this video, commenting, and even sharing. All of this really helps, and I genuinely appreciate it. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.